Today's models have some seriously high context windows, some in the millions of tokens, and you may be deciding whether to use a RAG platform to store your data, just shove it directly into the model itself, or maybe a little of both. In this video, I'll compare both RAG and direct context approaches, show you some examples, and leave you with guidelines you can use when deciding for yourself. Let's get into it. Okay, so before I get into the setup, just a quick primer on RAG and direct context. RAG being retrieval augmented generation. It's a method we've been using for the last few years with LLMs to be able to search for and extract data using vector searches that will give us small chunks of data back that we can then inject into the context of a model to get some type of answer for a query. Where the direct context method, instead of just searching for something, will actually take a document or documents and inject the whole set of them directly into the model. And this has really started to kind of see its day here recently because the context windows of models and the processing, the speed, performance, also the accuracy of needle in the haystack and everything has become, has gotten to a level where this has really become feasible. Now, looking at the app itself, just kind of break down like what does the platform look like. So you'll see on the left-hand side, we have our inference model. This is the one that we're actually going to use to perform all of our queries. For our purposes today, the GPT OSS 20 billion cloud parameter model actually works really well. I'm using the cloud version on Llama across the board for all of these. Then you'll see the pricing model here. Now, this is actually just getting the latest data from OpenAI. I'm using something I think is kind of reasonable. GPT 5.4, we could even say GPT 5, honestly. This is just pricing information that we can use in the cost comparison later to get an idea of the differences in cost. So here's what I'd like to do. I've ingested a whole set of character documents from a previous game that I created that look something like what you see here with Thorn in the Wild. It's got some details, it has an image I want to pull some OCR information from, statistics, abilities, things like that. Not super dense, but a lot of them. Then I'm going to take you through what that looks like from the RAG portion of the pipeline, both on ingest and query. Then we're going to go back and we're going to do the same thing direct context, both for ingest and query, and then combine at the end and kind of compare. I've uploaded a set of these 23 characters. You see these file status checks here. And what it's actually doing is it's going back here into my RAG platform. It's double checking to see whether or not I have the particular file name. Now I'm doing this as a more coarse way to do it. I'm just checking the file name because I know that the content of these documents hasn't changed. So I'm saving myself the step. And right off the bat, this is actually something that once you've ingested a set of documents once in RAG, you've essentially paid the upfront cost. If you were to ingest then the same document again at a later time, if it doesn't have any changes, you don't pay that cost again, right? You've already paid the cost. Now let's take a look at the query. So if I go over to the query side, I've said, tell me about Thorn in the Wild. Now let's go ahead and take a look at that query here in OpenRAG so we can actually see what the RAG pipeline looks like. Okay, so I'm just going to click on that. Notice, tell me about Thorn in the Wild. So these are the input tokens that I've used. It's very minimal, right? And it has done a successful search, look for the particular document, and it came up with the answer that we see here. Right. And so that's exactly what we're seeing in this response. And that's actually the most important thing, right? I want to make sure that I have the right details and all of that. Now, finally, I've ingested, I've done the query. Let's go ahead and take a look at the performance. So in this case, if I do the breakdown, you can see a little bit of a breakdown between how much the generation time took, the amount of tokens used, and the cost. And again, these costs are being based off of the pricing model here that I'm using. So I'm using GPT 5.4, not the most expensive 5.4 Pro, using the latest data from OpenAI. Now, what's really key here is if you take a look is you can see the amount of tokens, again, is very low. So if you remember, both the input and output tokens was pretty minimal for the RAG pipelines, and that really does keep costs down. As far as the context window goes for this model that has a context window of 128,000 tokens, I'm barely using anything. So I have more than enough room to go from that standpoint. Okay, so what I want to do now is go back over. It's the same set of documents, right? That hasn't changed. But I'm going to look at the direct side, right? Now, one thing you'll notice is that the time for ingestion was very similar. Why? Well, again, I had previously ingested these particular documents into the RAG pipeline. If I hadn't done that and I uploaded them, it takes a little bit more time for the initial ingestion, right? So one big difference here is you'll notice the token count. Now, this is actually coming from the extracted text. One big difference between a lot of RAG pipelines and OpenRAG and doing the direct method is that In the RAG pipeline, usually you have all of the document parsing pieces in place. And in OpenRAG, that is definitely the case. In the direct method, you have to do that yourself, or you're potentially using a service. I know OpenAI, Claude, things like this, they'll do this. They're really just parsing and extracting the content from PDFs and docs and stuff behind the scenes, right? So they're kind of doing something similar there. Now, in this particular case, we are not actually extracting the images here. We are not putting them to the model, so you only have about 8,800 tokens. And if I show you the full text, you can see all of the text from all of the documents that we ingested that were now combined into a single set of context that we're going to send into the model. All right, so now if I go over to the query side, and again, look at the direct approach. Now, right off the bat, you might notice the time to execute, or the time to inference here is a lot faster, right? So generally speaking, when your context amounts, when your token amounts are actually lower, you're usually going to get a faster response from the direct approach compared to RAG or the hybrid. Now, that does start to trail off a bit as you get higher and higher and higher token amounts, but we'll get there. And again, just taking a quick look at this, right? I'm looking at some of the stats, right? It looks like I've got generally the right information. And this looks exactly how I'd expect. Now let's take a look at the performance of the direct context approach. So again, we already talked about the time here. Now the big difference though is really in the amount of tokens that are being used. This is significantly more than what you see for the RAG portion, especially on those input tokens, because you're injecting all of that context directly into the model. And that also then translates into the cost. So I'm going to look at the cost of the hybrid actually, because this is executing the same thing. This says 0 because I'm using Olama, and I don't really calculate the cost quite the same way. If I'm using a local model, it's just the cost of my GPU, right? But this is really what you're seeing here. So it's about a good order of magnitude difference there as far as cost. And if we come on over to the actual query itself, let's take a look. Now, this, by the way, yes, I'm using OpenRAG for the hybrid portion, but this is the same exact prompt that goes into the direct method I used a moment ago. I just want you to see this so you can kind of get a feel for the difference between the way that direct context and RAG works. So you can see here, I've got my system prompt, and then I have all of that context, all those documents. The whole thing is being injected directly in to our context, and then I'm given the result. And again, if we compare that to the RAG portion, you can see now this is where that difference in the amount of input tokens comes into play. So again, when we break this down, we look at those tokens, you can see the input tokens really eats up a lot of the particular token cost and the monetary cost of using the direct approach. This time, I'm going to bring you through a slightly different scenario where I'm actually using data from FinanceBench. And if you're not familiar with FinanceBench, it is a test suite for evaluating the performance of LLMs on open book financial questions, right? So really interesting reading if you want to get into it. Now, I've actually taken 2 of the documents from FinanceBench, both these Walmart financial documents. Now, I chose these 2 on purpose because they start to butt up against the context window limits of the direct context approach. And I want to show you some of the outcomes of that. Now, for this query, what I'm going to do, I'm going to pull in a question that I have there. So through May 2023, how much did the company pay in aggregate for separate settlements? Now, I happen to know the answer for this is 0.6 billion. And so we really want to see what the outcome is going to be. Now, this error, by the way, I do expect that because I blew up the context window of the hybrid approach, but that's okay. We're really focused on RAG and direct anyway. Okay, so here's what I want you to notice. Now, this time around, now that we have the amount of tokens with our documents that has taken up the vast majority of the context window for the model that we're using, notice here that the RAG approach was actually a lot faster than the direct approach. And this is definitely something you'll start to see. Once you push past like the effective context for a given model, you may start to see some degradation in performance, accuracy, things like that. Now, the right answer here, in fact, is 0.6 billion is the document. Okay, and we do see that the RAG approach here got this right. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the performance. Again, focusing on RAG, look at the metrics breakdown. Now, again, I want to bring out those tokens. So we have, very low token cost here, and the cost is, pretty much negligible per request. And then that context window out of 128,000 token context window barely uses anything. Okay, so let's go ahead and then look at the same thing for the direct approach. Now, this is getting into, again, this context route because we are really pushing up to the context window usage. And one of the things that we see today still, even with the best models, they're still better in the direct context approach of being able to be accurate on the front end and the back end of the document. And they get lost in the middle sometimes. And that's pretty much what we're seeing here. So it actually got close, but it hallucinated the value of 0.4 billion when it should have been 0.6 billion. So we've used up an absolute ton of the contexts. So I did mention effective context a little moment ago. Let me explain quickly what that is. So generally speaking, you might have a model that can handle, say, 1,000,000 tokens in its context windows, but its effective context really might be from, say, 50,000, 100,000 to 200,000 maybe. There's a lot of models, especially at 128,000 tokens. You might be talking like 30 to 50,000 tokens as your effective context. And once you start pushing past that, then your processing time starts going down, as in like getting slower, your accuracy starts to degrade and such like that as well. So it's one of those areas where when you're trying to think about the sweet spot between where do I want RAG and where do I want direct context, you want to stay in that effective context window. If you think you're going to go beyond that, it might be a good time to use RAG. So when you're thinking about using RAG or direct context, it's not really this mutually exclusive, you have to use one or the other type thing. It can, in fact, depending on your use case, be a better together story. Now, when thinking about RAG, they are great for large sets of data, very large documents. Generally, RAG will support many file formats, and it has a lower overall token cost. Now, from the direct context standpoint, they do a much better job of actually having good holistic accuracy over a whole document. Inference tends to be faster, but the trade-off there is you need to usually go with smaller, medium-sized documents. There is a hard limit on the number of tokens that you can use, and you don't want to push past the effective context, or the very benefits you'll get with direct context start to diminish off. And there you have it, a bit of a comparison between RAG and direct context. As usual, I hope you got something useful from this video. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Happy coding.